Sup, guys? It's Toad back again, doing all these live shows now. But this is a little bit late, but this is the official college football week 2 video, and I still think that the numbers that I'm going to give out are basically out there, and one of them might even actually get a little bit better. Like one of them, I don't think you need to actually play it immediately. Well, none of them I really do, but one of them I think might hit a key number and become a better number. And I'm fresh off a 2-0 day, baby. I'm on fire again. Need to continue it, though, to get back to breaking even on the year. But I hit on the Kansas City Royals, and I just watched the Philadelphia Eagles try to blow it, but not blow it. And unfortunately, Jordan Love looked like he suffered a pretty bad leg injury on the second to last play of that game. Just really insane. If that winds up putting him out for a long time, that's going to be pretty bad. It's going to make for a lot worse football out of Green Bay. That is terrible. Although I am obviously taking the win on the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's talk about this college football, man. That's what we're here to do. College football is still on right now. That later Northwestern Duke game is still on right now. I don't even know what's going on in that game. Probably not a lot of scoring. Just like my life, obviously. SMU, I don't know how SMU is playing this poorly, dude. With all those returning starters, they just dropped that game. They were a massive favorite in 2 straight games, and they could be 0-2 right now, potentially. They barely beat Nevada, and now they just lost. Who were they even playing today? I don't even remember who they were playing. Some opponent who's much worse than they are. BYU, yeah, and they lost that game. Well, BYU is not as bad as Nevada, but still. All right, let's get into some college football. Maybe I'll talk about, there aren't too many big games on the slate, but I guess I'll talk about some of the big games because all of my actual plays are, I don't think any of them are on any of the real big games. We can talk about some of these ranked games here. There are only a few that are really discussion worthy. Texas and Michigan is obviously one of the big games on the board. I don't know if that's where the College Game Day crew is going to be this week or not, but that's like the biggest game on the board. I mean, it's number 3 Texas against number 10 Michigan, the returning champs. And to me, I mean, I think the public is going to be coming in on Texas in this one. I went down the whole card a little while ago, and I looked. This was not one that was really one that I wanted to play, although I do lean to the Michigan side in this one, plus the points. Texas, as you can see, is up from -5.5 to -7 here. 80% of the tickets on them, so they are indeed public. 77% of the cash, so a little bit less of the cash. I lean with the Michigan side, and a lot of it has to do with, I think some of this is recency bias, man. I think that's kind of the reason the line has gone up rather than it being actual movement, like legitimate, like movement coming in. Although you do see some guys, some of the professional bettors will come in and say, oh, this is kind of close to a key number. Maybe we can get it up to 7 just so we can then come in and take the other side. Like get it up to that key number just so you can actually come in with more money on the side you actually want to come in on. But Texas, I mean, they just obliterated Colorado State, shut them out 52-0. So people, this is week 2, man. This is overreaction week. Week 2, which is, it tends to be one of the better weeks for bettors. I had a bad week 1, of course. I went 0-3 after going 1-0 in week 0. Week 1 tends to be a little bit tough because you don't exactly know what you're going to get, but typically, I do like to look at those teams that have a lot of the returning starters, which I did, and it didn't work out for me. But week 2 tends to be a lot better because the lines overreact to week 1. You only have 1 game worth of data, basically, for every team. So everybody just does what's natural in humans, basically, and all they can really do is overreact to what they saw last, which is just that 1 game. So you get some huge overreactions in the lines, more so than in any other week. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention I have my Boston College hat on here. BC, baby, as they're fresh off that nice upset of Florida State, who 2 weeks in is already eliminated from playoff contention, essentially. So, I mean, I'm kind of happy about it. My lean was correct in that game, at least, but I kind of wish I bet it, but I'm just happy because I kind of do root for BC. So anyway, back to this Texas-Michigan game. Texas shut out Colorado State, man. So everybody saw that. Everybody's just going to react to what they saw last. Like I said, a massive blowout win and shutout over a team that people know, at least by name, and know that this is a decent college football program, Colorado State. However, I don't know how good they really are this year. I think Colorado State could be down a little bit this year. And Texas was a giant favorite in that game. I think they were like a 35-point favorite, something along those lines in that game. So they were supposed to annihilate them, and they did. Whereas Michigan, on the other hand, did not look nearly as impressive, struggling at home in the big house against Fresno State. And they won by 20, but this game was actually a lot closer. As you can see here, it was within 6 points with 10 minutes to go in the game, basically, or actually into the final 5 minutes when Michigan finally scored a touchdown there. And Michigan then had a pick six near the end to make it look better than it actually was. So Michigan struggled, man. So I actually like Michigan in this one for those reasons, because I think that might be a wake-up call for Michigan. Of course, Michigan, they're going to have some growing pains because they lost J.J. McCarthy. They lost some of their key components from last year from that championship team. They're not going to be as good as last year, but they're still one of the huge college programs. I mean, they just reload. They always are stacked with talent regardless. And, of course, they lost Harbaugh as well. The sign-stealing regime is over from Michigan. I haven't watched that documentary yet that's out on Netflix now, the Untold series or whatever it is. Could be interesting. Maybe I'll watch that. But those cheaters, man, Michigan. So Michigan, yeah, I mean, they'll take a little bit of a step down, but I think people are overreacting to it right now. Like, oh, Michigan, they lost J.J. McCarthy. The great Michigan program is completely over. It's Texas's time now. And yes, Texas is good. The line is telling you that Texas is actually the better team, which they are. But I think that it's gone a little too far, man. I think it's overreacting a little bit to that week one line. So I do like the Michigan side in that one. What else we got for big games here? I mean, Georgia Tech, Syracuse. I don't know if we consider that to be a big game, although I think it is an ACC matchup. Georgia Tech, if they were fresh off of the Florida State upset, I might say go against them. I was saying potentially could have gone against them last week against Georgia State, and I believe Georgia Tech did not cover that spread. I think it was more than the 23 that they won by. But now that they got that middle game in there, I don't think Georgia Tech is in that much of a fade spot this time. And Syracuse, though, I think Syracuse, they're coming off a kind of unimpressive performance against Ohio. And Ohio, I believe, had Rourke as their quarterback for a long time, and he's now gone. I think he graduated, but he was basically an elite quarterback in the MAC, and he's now gone. So Syracuse not playing that well against Ohio is not that impressive. So it seems like Syracuse might be in a little bit of the better spot and have like a bit of a wake-up call there. But in that game, Georgia Tech has moved up from -1.5 to -3, and Syracuse actually has the public on them. 58% of the tickets, 51% of the cash. So the market read is actually against Syracuse in that one. So I don't know if there's that much else to say about that. Iowa State's a pretty big game just because it's a rivalry game. I don't think there's that much to take away. I think both of these teams just played cupcakes in week one. Iowa shut out Illinois State, not a big deal. Iowa State played North Dakota, and Iowa State was the less impressive team. Their offense didn't really do well, but Iowa State tends to be a more defensive-oriented program. You can see my action network there. You'll see what my plays are that are coming up, man. So I do actually kind of lean to Iowa State in that one, just because they were less impressive, and Iowa is the ranked team against Iowa State not being ranked, and it's almost like the odds makers are begging you to take Iowa in this one. They're down from -3 to -2.5, 69% of the tickets on them, but only 52% of the cash. So public Iowa, they're the ranked team. They have some line movement going against them. I do think Iowa State's being a little bit maybe undervalued here, and the odds makers are actually kind of hinting to you that Iowa State's actually the slightly better team, as they're not even getting a full field goal on the road at Iowa. So the odds makers are kind of telling you something with that line. And like I said, it almost looks like almost kind of a trap, like begging you to take the team that's ranked higher at home, laying under a field goal. It almost looks too easy to take Iowa there. So you're not going to find me taking Iowa there. Michigan State, Maryland is an interesting one, where Michigan State. So a couple of the key things that you want to look at in week two, basically, and some of this is going to factor into the games that I'm actually playing. Hope this video doesn't go too long. I'm talking about too many games here. But it is, I mean, it's late at night. I don't really need to sleep. It's Friday night, so it's fine. The angles basically are you want to look for good teams, or at least good programs that really underperformed in that first game and were maybe like a huge favorite, like Michigan State was, and almost lost the game, because that tends to be kind of a wake-up call, and it causes them to kind of refocus and focus coming into the next game. So that's one thing you want to look for. Those are play on teams in week 2. And the play against teams are the teams that are kind of going to be in like letdown mode or hangover mode. Like if you have like a smaller school or something that played a bigger school and play them to the wire or something like that and almost beat them, then they tend to be kind of gassed basically after that. They put in so much effort in that first game. If they have a kind of a lesser game and they're not going to be maybe as focused in the next game here, they tend to suffer a little bit of a letdown or hangover spot from that first game. So that's what you kind of want to look for. So Michigan State, I do think, should be in kind of a bounce back spot. Although, I don't know what we're going to see out of them because, as I mentioned last week, when I said I leaned to Florida Atlantic against them, Florida Atlantic almost beat them outright because Michigan State just can't score. Michigan State has all these new pieces coming in. As I mentioned, a lot of them are coming from Oregon State, which is where their coach came from. So he brought a few of his offensive players over, including Childs, I believe is how you pronounce it, the quarterback. I was making fun of it last week and calling him Chiles, just because it sounds more funny to me. But we'll see. Michigan State, I mean, I don't think they're going to continue to be as bad as they were in that first week, although they are a program that is having to definitely rebuild right now. They're definitely a down program. As you can see, they're 8.5-point underdogs against Maryland. But what really justifies Maryland being an 8.5-point favorite, man, against another Big Ten opponent? Maryland's one of the lesser teams in this conference, too, and they lost Tua's brother. I forget what his name is. He was their quarterback for at least a few years, I think, and he graduated, I believe. So Maryland, I don't even know who they started at quarterback. It seemed like they were waiting until the last minute to even decide on a quarterback for week 1. So I do lean to the Michigan State side in this one. Maryland, 71% of tickets on. Nobody wants anything to do with Michigan State. They are no longer a respected program in the eyes of the public, basically. They have 58% of the cash, though. So some money looks like it's coming in on the Michigan State side. I actually do agree with it on that one. Like I said, Michigan State, they're coming off that horrific game against Florida Atlantic, and that was a game, I think, last Friday, so it was one of those isolated games where it was actually on TV, I think, so it was more publicized, so that's another reason why the public might overreact even further to that, because they saw Michigan State in that game. Michigan State won 16-10 and almost lost the game, and it's like they looked so bad, and the public saw it happen. It's like, even though, yeah, I mean, Florida Atlantic only had 3 points in the first half, but still, Michigan State didn't even score in the second half. It is kind of a red flag, but that looks pretty bad, man. And one of their scores is a safety, too, so they really did not do a whole lot of scoring on offense. And one was a big 63-yard run, too. So people saw that. Florida Atlantic. Michigan State looked really bad against Florida Atlantic, whereas Maryland, I believe they won their game. Yeah, they won, and they absolutely blew out UConn, but I mean, UConn's not a very good team. I don't think that's that impressive. I mean, it's impressive when you beat another FBS team, I guess, by that margin, but Maryland was a big favorite, 18.5. They're a heavier favorite than Florida Atlantic was by a little bit. So another kind of interesting one there, but I think that Michigan State has to be in kind of more the refocus spot there, whereas Maryland just absolutely annihilated UConn. And I think that was at home, too. So that was Maryland's home opener. So they've already played that game. Well, this is going to be their conference home opener. And is that going to make them a little bit focused? Potentially. But I lean to the Michigan State side in that one. What else we got? There aren't too many interesting games. Like I said, we get way more like interesting games once we get out of the few cupcake weeks that we have, where a lot of the big guys are just facing cupcakes. Let me see. Kansas and Illinois, I guess, is kind of an interesting one. Kansas, they tend to start these seasons overrated a lot, man, and overranked. I mean, I don't know what justifies them being the 19th ranked team in the country. I mean, they have had decent starts to a few seasons recently, but they always seem to kind of trail off until last year. I think last year was a year where they finally made a bowl. I don't know if they'd made a bowl the prior couple of years, or maybe if they did, they didn't win it or something, but they finally won a bowl. So they seem to be a program that is kind of rising up again. But at this point, I think the stock is a little bit too high on Kansas, because what have they really done, man? I mean, they beat UNLV in a bowl game. I don't know if we can really put that much stock into that. Kansas was a big favorite in that one. Kansas, I mean, they've only played an FCS guy so far, Lindenwood. I mean, Not impressive. Nobody cares about that game. And now they're going on the road for the first time this year. So that first road game is always a little bit more difficult too, because you're going into that heavy like road environment, having to face that big time crowd on the road. There is Illinois. I think the crowd's going to be up for that game at home, man. And they're coming off a nice win too over Eastern Illinois, which I don't know if anybody cares that much about that too. Although I think Eastern Illinois is where Tony Romo and Jimmy Garoppolo, I think both went there, something like that. I don't even think they're an FCS. Are they? Yeah, I guess they are an FCS team. Yeah, they're not Division II. They're FCS. I think they are Division I. But there's nothing you could take away from this. I mean, both of these teams just beat cupcakes, basically, even though Eastern Illinois, I mean, yeah, they might get up for a game against the big guy in their state, the in-state big brother Illinois, but there's only so much you can do when you're totally outclassed and out-talented by a much better Illinois team. Doesn't really matter. But I think the crowd will come in. They get a ranked team coming into their house. I think the crowd will be excited for it, more excited than they were for that first game, even though it is the start of college football season. So I expect a better crowd for Illinois there. So I do lean to the Illinois side in that one too. Kansas is down from 5 to 4.5 as a road favorite. 57% of tickets on them, but 51% of the cash over on the other side on Illinois. So I like the Illinois side there. The market is agreeing with that one too. What else we got here? Virginia, Wake Forest. You at least have an ACC matchup there. I don't know. Wake Forest beat NCAA. Nobody really cares about that. NCAA sometimes is in that celebration bowl, though, where they celebrate the best FCS teams, or not even the best FCS teams, the best teams that are in like some of the smallest conferences, I guess, in all of D1, I guess, because they're certainly not the best FCS teams, but NCAA usually has a pretty decent program for an FCS team, though. So not a bad win for Wake Forest, really, all things considered. Virginia beat Richmond. Again, not very impressive, but Richmond, I mean, they're going to step it up when they play their in-state big brother there in Virginia. So I don't know. Virginia, I do think, is one of the programs that has a lot of returning starters coming back too, though. So Virginia might be prepared to like hit the gate running, but this is going to be a tough environment going on the road to Wake Forest. So I don't know what we're going to really get out of these teams here. In Wake Forest, I don't think they're going to overlook Virginia just because they have Ole Miss coming up, which is a huge game, obviously. Ole Miss, big SEC team, a very highly ranked Ole Miss team. But I think Wake is also probably going to figure, well, we're probably not going to win that game. And this is the start of conference play, right? They're both in the ACC, so I don't think they're going to overlook their conference home opener like that. So I don't think the look ahead is really going to be a factor there for Wake. Wake is down from -2 to pick them, though. Virginia, 62% of tickets, but 73% of the cash. So the market is indicating on the Virginia side. And I think maybe some of it is just because of those returning starters they have going on there. What else we got? And then Tennessee, NC State is one of the bigger games on the board, too. So that's a ranked matchup there as well. Two ranked teams, 14 Tennessee against number 24 NC State. And this game got moved on the board, even though I still think it's on Saturday. I think they must have just moved it into like the primetime slot on one of the big, made it one of the big TV games or something, because it got moved into a write-in game. I don't really know why. But as far as this game is concerned, Tennessee's up from 6.5 to 9 as a pretty big road favorite, but they're getting a lot of the public action because they're the bigger name program. They're definitely perceived as the better team. They are the better team. They're in the better conference, the SEC. Everybody knows that. So the public's coming in on Tennessee to the tune of 81%, but 79% of the cash, so a little bit less of the cash, even though the line has moved up a bit on Tennessee. This one's a tough read for me. I kind of lean against Tennessee just because I tend to lean against those the more highly ranked team just because the public's going to be coming in on them to too much of a degree. So you tend to not really get value on that particular side. Tennessee's coming up blasting UT Chattanooga, an in-state little brother, but they just had nothing. So yeah, Tennessee, I mean, it's an impressive looking score, 69-3, 69, nice. But is it really that impressive against a really bad Chattanooga team? I don't know. Maybe not. An FCS team. NC State looked pretty bad, actually, struggling against an FCS team there in Western Carolina. That's not good. Only beating them by 17. So I think the perception is going to be on Tennessee as well. Like, I think it's going to be a little bit of an overreaction because Tennessee won by so much, and NC State struggled to even get by Western Carolina. So I think Tennessee is certainly the better team, but I think the truth is not as ridiculous as it looked in that week 1. So I think we can say that probably you're not getting any value on the Tennessee side, but I'm not really like jumping out of my seat to go bet against Tennessee in that spot either, though. What else we got here? I don't really care about Colorado, Nebraska. It is what it is. Colorado. I mean, they get all the talk because it's Deion Sanders and his son is quarterback and whatever. I think maybe one of his other sons is also, I don't even know, also on the team. I forget, but Colorado, they're just not that great a team, man. Nebraska's a pretty decent-sized favorite there. I don't even know what I think about that, but Colorado didn't look that great, and everybody was watching that game because I think that was an isolated TV game, too, on an off night against North Dakota State. So I think Colorado has some extra time off there, too. So does that mean Colorado might be the right side? And maybe, like, getting at least 6.5 points there or whatever it is? I don't know, possibly. I don't really know, man. And then you got Oklahoma and Houston. I mean, Oklahoma's probably a massive favorite. I think Houston's kind of in rebuilding mode, but Houston lost horrifically to UNLV, just totally embarrassing, while Oklahoma absolutely shredded Temple. Oklahoma's getting a new quarterback in play there, and Temple is really bad. Like, I think they're probably one of the worst FBS teams this year, so I don't think that that's as impressive maybe as that score actually makes it look. But Oklahoma's just such a giant favorite in this game anyway. I don't think I want to do anything with this game at all. Oklahoma, what are they up to? I don't even know. 27.5. And they're massively public. 95% of tickets, 91% of the cash, whatever. Boise at Oregon could be maybe interesting. Boise, I mean, they're a pretty name program there. Oregon's like a double-digit favorite here. But both of these teams actually kind of struggled in week 1, man. Boise, I mean, their defense, that doesn't look good, giving up 45 to Georgia Southern. Even though Georgia Southern, not a bad program, really. They're in FBS now, and they've made some bowls recently. So maybe not that bad, but I don't know. Giving up 45 just in general is not really a great look. Boise had a big lead for a while, and then Georgia Southern came back and actually took the lead over them coming in late in the game. Georgia Southern actually had the lead in the 4th quarter until Boise exploded with 3 straight touchdowns, it looks like. Boise completely outgained them, though, so I don't know how they wound up not outscoring them by more than they did. But still, not a hugely impressive win out of Boise State there, but Oregon wasn't very impressive in their first game either, and they're ranked 7th in the nation, and they face an Idaho team who's been relegated out of FBS. They were an FBS team for a while, and they're in, I think the WAC or something, I don't know, they're in some conference that was in FBS, and now they're in FCS, and they've moved over to the Big Sky, which I think might be where they are in basketball as well, but basketball is just all D1 is kind of one thing. Football, it's split between FBS and FCS. So Idaho's now in FCS, although they have a history of being in FBS football for a while. So maybe they're not the worst FCS team, but this is not impressive, dude. Oregon, you come into this game ranked 7th in the nation playing Idaho. I don't even know if there was a line on this. There was no line in this. Oregon probably would have been such a massive favorite, and they only won the game by 10, and they were winning by 3 like fairly late in the 4th quarter. I mean, that's just insane. And Oregon, with Dylan Gabriel, who came over from Oklahoma, speaking of Oklahoma having a new quarterback, their quarterback is now at Oregon because they had to replace Bo Nix. But, Oregon, that looks like some growing pains there to me. I think we're going to see them get better, though. I mean, they're not going to be as bad as this, but that's just crazy. And they did dominate the yardage battle in the first down battle there. So I really don't even know how this game was as close as it was on the scoreboard. But that's just crazy if you're only within 3 of Idaho at home like that. So I think both of these teams are kind of in bounce back spots for Oregon and Boise. Oregon's up from 18 to 19, 60% of the tickets with 66% of the cash on Oregon. They're a little bit public, but the line looks like it's moving their direction. Cash looks like it's a little bit on Oregon. I kind of agree with the Oregon side. What's up, Scott? Oh, hell no. What are you saying that to, man? What's up, man? I'm not paying enough attention to the comments, man, because I'm just in super hyper autist mode here. But I actually agree with the Oregon side here, because when you have 2 teams like this that both had close calls like this, and they're both going to be in kind of like refocus spots here, I tend to want to go with the team that's actually the better team and better program, like the Class A program, really, which is Oregon, because that's the team. You get a good team, like a really good team, off of a really bad performance like that, and their performance is even worse than Boise's, basically. I think that would be the side that I would lean to in that one. So that would be the lean there, Oregon. And what else we got? We'll comment on USC just because I was close to wanting to play against USC. USC is not in a very good scheduling spot, in my opinion. They just came off that big win on an isolated game there against LSU, which I think was Sunday night. So they actually have less time off, too. So they have 1 day fewer off than I believe Utah State does. So I'm assuming Utah State played on Saturday with the majority of college football. USC had that big TV game against ranked LSU and pulled off a big win, man. Great way to start the season. So I could see USC potentially being in a letdown spot here. And up next, they have number 10 ranked Michigan. But I'm not going to quite get there playing against USC just because it is a game where USC could potentially just kind of name the score. They just outclass Utah State by enough that I hesitate to do it. I don't play a lot of like 28-point underdogs or favorites, really, although USC I do think is in the bad scheduling spot, and it's almost bad enough that I was considering actually jumping in. I think I played a couple of underdogs of a size that big last year, and I think maybe they went like 50-50 in those. There weren't that many. But USC, yeah, coming off that big win over a ranked LSU team, and they got the returning champs in Michigan, who are ranked 10, going to the Big House, but skipping a week there. So they actually have a bye before they go into that. So they have a bye next week. So if they were playing Michigan right away, I think this would be a more insane sandwich spot, because I always talk about the sandwich spots when it comes to football, man. When you have a team that's in kind of a down scheduling spot between two much, much bigger games, that's a sandwich. And if they put in a big effort, and that was a close game, big effort against LSU, they could be in kind of the letdown spot, but then they'd also be looking ahead to that bigger game next. And they still could be, even though there's a bye in between there. That's a big game against Michigan, man. And that's also going to be USC's Big Ten opener, because they're in the Big Ten now. So that is a pretty huge game, dude. So I lean against USC. I would not want to be laying the points with USC here. Utah State, I don't even know what Utah State actually did last week, but I mean, they are definitely the worst team. They beat Robert Morris. Not impressive. Not a very impressive final score there either. Not big. And they do have a game against Utah next, which is a big in-state rival there, but still, I mean, are they really going to overlook USC? Probably not. It's just a matter of how much worse than USC is Utah State. Like, are they just going to be so out-talented that they won't be able to keep up? That's really what you have to gauge here. So, yeah, USC is up from 27 to 28.5 as a favor, going through the 28.5, but they are public. The public likes what they saw. They know that USC is the way better team, so 79% of tickets are on them and only 53% of the cash. So the market does look like it's indicating on Utah State, even though the line has moved up a little bit on USC. I lean to the Utah State side. Now let's get to my plays, man. Play number one, finally, halfway through the video, basically. It's probably going to be an hour-long video. Half an hour each. First play up, I'm just going by which games start first and whatever. Army, +3. And we're actually getting more value on this now. +3 actually was reduced juice out there, too, at -105 or something like that. So I like Army, even though the line has moved up a little bit. Oh, and I already have it right there. I'd already scrolled to it. What do you know? Army is playing Florida Atlantic, a team I mentioned a little while back in this show. So I think you know where I'm going with this. If you know how I bet these games, bet these teams, especially in week 2. Florida Atlantic is up a little bit from -2.5 to -3, but public on Army, 65% of the tickets. So the public knows Army is probably the better team, even though Florida Atlantic is getting that full feel going home. I think the odds makers are kind of telling you these teams are close to even, but maybe Army's like the slightly better team, which I kind of think they are. The public does think they are, 65% of the tickets, but 72% of the cash on Army. I think the situation is what really dictates this, rather than like which team is actually really better than the other team. I don't do a whole lot with the numbers. I'm not really a numbers guy. More so I'm looking at the situations, man, and kind of trusting the odds makers to just avoid throwing up lines that are so ridiculously off that that you'd be able to find like massive value on there. I don't think they tend to do that in sports that have a lot of focus on them, even in a game that not a lot of people are going to be focused on, like Army and Florida Atlantic. But Florida Atlantic, generally, I think they're the worst program, which is why the public is coming in against them. But I like the spot here, man. I should be pulling this up. Oh, man. Florida Atlantic. I usually have these up in tabs, and I forgot to do that this time. So Florida Atlantic, they're coming off that game against Michigan State, which I mentioned, where they hung in there as a double-digit underdog to open the season at Michigan State, man. That's a big game for Florida Atlantic, and they played tough, and they were in that game. In the third quarter, they cut it to a 6-point game, and then just no points were scored in the fourth. So they were within a touchdown for an entire quarter of that game, and it potentially had shots to actually beat Michigan State there. So now they're coming off that. I think they're going to be in a bit of a letdown spot. And up next, they do have Florida International, who is kind of their biggest in-state rival, even though Florida International hasn't really been that good either. And I think they were, for a time, in the same conference, in Conference USA or something like that, but now they're in different conferences. Florida Atlantic's in the American. Florida International, I think, might still be in Conference USA. I'm not even sure, but that's still a big rivalry that's left over. I think they weren't in the same conference last year either, because I don't think they played for 2 years, actually. And Florida Atlantic did win the most recent matchup against them, but I think that is still a big game. And are they really going to pay attention to Army? I don't know. It is the conference opener. It is their home opener. So that makes me hesitate just a little bit, but I do think the spot is bad enough that I do think that Army is a play here, and it is going to be a play for me. So it's one of the rare situations where I'll actually fade a team in their conference home opener. It is Florida Atlantic. As much as I say these conference home openers tend to draw a lot of crowds, but you saw how well that worked out for me last week when I was on a bunch of home openers, especially in those smaller conferences. They just don't draw enough of a crowd to really make it a giant factor, and I think that's the case with Florida Atlantic too, even though I don't know if Florida Atlantic's crowd might be impressed by what they did last week against Michigan State, maybe. But still, I don't think they have a massive home field advantage or anything like that at Florida Atlantic. Meanwhile, Army on the other side here. Army, what did they do last week? They beat Lehigh. Just nothing you can really garner from that, really. I mean, that's an FCS team. Doesn't really matter. Army beat Lehigh. Who cares? And now they're also playing their first conference game, so they might also have reason to focus because they're going on the road and playing a first conference game, so I'm not sure they're going to be unfocused. Both teams should probably be a bit focused, but the thing that puts it over the top, not just that Florida Atlantic's coming off putting a huge effort in against Michigan State, so the hangover factor there is more significant than the potential look ahead to Florida International. I think that hangover spot, I think, is pretty big from facing Michigan State, but Army also plays a triple option offense, man. They're one of the service academies. They run triple options, and if you're not used to facing it, and Army is new to this conference, so Florida Atlantic's not used to facing these triple option offenses, they will become used to it because they're going to have to face Army and I think Navy, who are both in this conference now. But teams that aren't used to it and then they get thrown into it and have to face it, they tend to not do well right away. They tend to struggle at facing that triple option because you don't know how to defend it. Even in your practices, like you can try to run triple option, try to defend against it, but you're not running the triple option like these guys that do it all the time are doing. Like there's nothing that can really replicate what you're up against in an actual in-game scenario. So I think that gives Army a little bit of an edge too. So that first play is Army plus the 3 for play number 1. Play number 2, this is the one that I was talking about where the line might actually become a little bit more advantageous to us, and that's going to be on South Carolina plus 9.5, which it might actually get up to 10. Like, I don't think there's any reason to play it now, really, if you think it might hit 10, because if it falls to 9, who cares? 9.5, 9, even 8.5, not a huge difference there between those. 10 is the key number in football, of course, touchdown plus field goal, but I like the South Carolina side in this one against Kentucky. This shows Kentucky as being up from -8 to -9, and they're pretty heavily public, 86% of the tickets and only 71% of the cash. So the public likes the Kentucky side, and I think a lot of it is going to be based on what we saw last week, of course, because this is overreaction week. People are going to overreact to what they saw, and they might still be overreacting to the fact that South Carolina is kind of having to rebuild their offense a little bit. They lost Spencer Rattler, I think was his name. He's in the NFL now. I think he was their quarterback up through last year, so they're having to turn over a new leaf there. But South Carolina, I think they do still have some guys returning on that team, and I think that they are kind of able to plug and play some guys in that offense such that it shouldn't be that bad, but it did look kind of bad in week 1. And we'll see, like I said, if this line actually gets to 10, because Kentucky is so public that it could potentially get up as high as 10. I do see the 9.5s out there right now, like I said, so potentially it could reach 10. So I think you could wait until tomorrow to play this one. So South Carolina, yeah, they're coming off a really, really lackluster performance, which is another reason why I like it. South Carolina, this was a hideous game against Old Dominion. Old Dominion's not that bad a team. People might not realize that. I mean, they've been making some bowls recently. They're an FBS team that's not horrendous. One of the better teams in whatever conference they're in. I think they might be in Conference USA as well now. I don't know where they are, but Old Dominion, I mean, they were playing an SEC team, so maybe they just stepped up their effort just enough. And South Carolina's quarterback, Sellers, didn't do well there, man. Stepping in there, trying to fill that void. 10 for 23, that's pretty bad. I think he's going to start doing better, though. And South Carolina does still have this rushing attack. They were using Sanders a lot. I think they play some decent defense, and they have a decent ground game. So that helps when you're an underdog, man. You want those teams that can play defense and that can run the football, because you want that game to be a little bit lower scoring. That helps that underdog come in and cash, because it makes those points worth a little bit more. So I like that. I haven't looked at what the total is. This total is really low, too. It's down from 46 to 41.5. It's one of the lowest totals on the board, probably. Man, that is a low college football total. And the under, not only is it dropped big time, but the under looks like it's getting a lot of the cash. 74% of the tickets, 98% of the cash. So that makes me like taking the points here, too, because the points are going to be harder to come by, is what the odds makers are telling you, with a total that low, 41.5. So that makes me like the underdog in South Carolina, too. Taking a bunch of points, getting almost 10 points in a game with a total of 41. Yeah, sign me up. But South Carolina, like I said, I think they're going to be focused, because this game was really, really, really bad, man, against Old Dominion. Look at how this game played out. Look at this. Old Dominion was at one point, at least 63.7% according to the win probability in ESPN to win the game in the fourth quarter. And what happened in this game? South Carolina was winning the game 16-7. And then, oh my God, Old Dominion actually took the lead by 3, which is where that spike was in the fourth quarter. South Carolina had to get a late touchdown there to retake the lead and then hold Old Dominion off. So they were losing that game in the fourth quarter as, I don't know, a 20-something point underdog, 20-something point favorite. 20.5 at home, South Carolina. That's just, I don't think they were totally focused, man. I think Old Dominion was like, hey, we're facing an SEC team to start our college football season. I think Old Dominion showed up for that game. South Carolina really did not. So I think this is going to be a bounce back spot. I think we're seeing the public, I think, overreacting to this a little bit. I think maybe the line's overreacting to this a little bit. South Carolina played so badly in that first game against a lesser Old Dominion team as a pretty big favorite. So I like South Carolina to be in a spot where they're going to show up and have some focus in this one because of how bad they played in that game. Whereas on the other side, Kentucky, they're kind of in the opposite type of scenario where they played a nice game against Southern Miss. I think they covered the spread there. They allowed 0 to Southern Miss. So again, pretty good defense there. But Southern Miss, I think, is a weaker team than Old Dominion is too. Southern Miss, I don't think they've been good for a couple of years now as a college football program. I think they're trying to rebuild their program. So I don't know if there's that much that you can really take away from Kentucky beating them 31-0, other than maybe Kentucky probably should have scored more. They only scored 7 points in the entire second half, although they might have put in some backups or something like that because the game is a bit out of hand. Maybe they did. But, I mean, Kentucky did dominate, but it was mostly because Southern Miss just, I think they're pretty inept offensively. Kentucky plays decent defense. Kentucky was a 25.5 point favorite. They covered. They won the game. Easy win in a shutout. But now, again, like I said, I think that's going to just give us some value on South Carolina because Kentucky looked like the way better of the two teams in week 1 there. So I like all of that. And then Kentucky, who do they have up next? They have Georgia up next, man. So as much as you might not overlook your conference home opener, so they already had their home opener, but this is their first SEC game of the season, but you might still have a little bit looking ahead there, man, to Georgia. And we know that last year, Georgia was, I wanted to go to schedule here. Georgia was the team that really, really kind of hammered Kentucky and kind of sent them spiraling last year. As you saw, Kentucky started off really hot, 5-0, and then Georgia totally destroyed them, 51-13. So I think I think Kentucky's gonna have that game circled, man, against Georgia. They're not gonna want to get totally wrecked again like that. And that sent them spiraling last year. Look at that. They only won 2 of their games after that and lost 5. So that really kind of threw them off course for the rest of the season pretty much. So I do think Kentucky might be looking ahead a little bit to Georgia as well. So that's the play there. That is South Carolina plus 9.5. Or if you wait, it's possible you might even get 10 on that one. And the final 2 games I got. So that was 3:30 Eastern. I think that Army game's at noon, 3:30 Eastern there. And now the last 2 I think might be evening games. First one up is going to be East Carolina plus 1.5. That's where I'm going on this one. I'm going to some of these lesser hailed games here. These games that have less going on here. Oh, and who's that against? Old Dominion. Go figure. I don't even know if I realized that I was making plays with both sides of that South Carolina Old Dominion game, because I was just kind of looking at this matchup that each of them are playing, and I was like, oh, South Carolina almost lost to an inferior team, and Old Dominion almost beat a much superior team. So that was just kind of what I was doing. Oh, and they just happened to have played each other, and it sets up 2 nice spots for us. So, hey, why not? So this is 6 p.m. Eastern. East Carolina is going to be the play in this one. Looking at what we got in the market here, looks like it's signaling on East Carolina, even though East Carolina is a little bit public. I don't know why, though, because Old Dominion's been the better program in recent years. I think East Carolina, I don't know when the last time they made a bowl was, but Old Dominion's made some bowls recently, whereas East Carolina has not. So I don't understand why the public is coming in on the East Carolina side, 70% of the tickets, but 81% of the cash. And because this is one of those lesser games on the board, I do think that cash discrepancy is probably relevant there and probably legitimate. And we've seen the line drop from 2 to 1.5. Not much of a difference between those 2 numbers. But it looks like the market is kind of signaling on the East Carolina side with more of the cash on them, with the line moving in their direction. And like I said, in a game that's not one of the massively public games like this, I think there's more that you can take away from that, because the ticket percentage actually might just be because there are a bunch of professionals coming in on this, because the public is less likely to be on a game like this. But more of the cash still. So that to me kind of indicates that it's more of a professional side. So I like seeing that, and that's what I'm doing here, man. East Carolina, they're coming off a game against Norfolk State. There's just not much that you can take away from it, I don't think. They are going on the road in this one, but East Carolina, this is going to be more of a fade of Old Dominion than anything else, because I think Old Dominion is in a really bad spot. And East Carolina, I mean, they didn't have to put in a huge effort at the very least against Norfolk State. So this is going to be a game where they get to play against Old Dominion, and Old Dominion's kind of had the upper hand over them in the last couple of seasons too. So I think maybe East Carolina might be ready for it, because it's the first FBS team they're going to be playing. So I kind of like that side of it. Whereas Old Dominion, I mean, they already played an FBS team, like I said, and boy, did they. They were winning at South Carolina in the 4th quarter as 21-point underdogs. That is crazy, dude. Old Dominion, they put in a huge effort in that one, and they could lapse in focus, even though this is going to be their home opener. That's tough, man. That is a tough game to come off of, almost beating South Carolina. You might not have that much left in the tank if you're Old Dominion. And then what do you have up next? You have one of your big in-state big brothers, Virginia Tech, up next. And Virginia Tech, I think, is seen as the biggest of the bigger brothers over University of Virginia, I think, because this is not basketball. This is football, where Virginia Tech has tended to have the better of those 2 programs over Virginia. That's a big game, dude. Old Dominion, whenever they play one of these bigger Virginia teams, in-state rival, because Old Dominion's in the state of Virginia, Old Dominion really steps up there. That could set up a look ahead, man, for Old Dominion. So this looks like a sandwich spot to me between 2 of the big boys there, even though Old Dominion, maybe they might have the thought that, like, well, we have a winnable game here, whereas these other 2 might not be as winnable. But I don't know, man. It looks like a monster sandwich to me. They put in such a big effort only to fall short against South Carolina. It looks like a bad spot to me for Old Dominion. So that's the play in that one. East Carolina plus 1.5. And then another +1.5 to finish it off. This one seems dangerous because this team's defense is basically non-existent, but I'm still doing it, man. Texas Tech. I think this is a bad spot for Washington State. I'm doing it on Texas Tech. This might be my least favorite of the plays, to be honest. We've seen Washington State. It looks like they've flipped. This is at Washington State late night, 10 p.m., because it's Pacific Coast, so it's 10 p.m. Eastern. Washington State looks like they've flipped from +1 to -1, so the favorite is flipped, but they are really public. Based on what happened last week, the public's only going to come in on Washington State, man. And based on what these teams have looked like recently, too, the public's only going to come in on Washington State. 75% of the tickets on them and only 61% of the cash. So they're public, but they have less of the cash. So the market looks like it's indicating that Washington State is not really a side you would want to be on because they're public and they have significantly less of the cash, at least for the time being. And I think we can see why. I mean, well, first of all, Washington State's just been the better program recently, but the problem with that is that they had Cam Ward for some of that as their quarterback. He's not there anymore. I mentioned him last week. He's at Miami now, so they don't have him anymore. So they're having to kind of restructure their offense a bit. So we could see some growing pains there, but their offense did do really well in that first game. And this is the other reason why I'm actually going against Washington State, even though they are facing another bad defense in Texas Tech here. And it looks like Mateer, their new quarterback, is kind of off to the races. He did have a really good game there, but that's against Portland State. I mean, come on, man. Portland State, an FCS team, and not a very good FCS team at that. Washington State gave up 30 points to them, though, which doesn't speak well for Washington State's defense, to be honest. Giving up 30 to Portland State, that's not great. Washington State scored 70, so it does look like their offense isn't really suffering without Cam Ward, although I do think once they start facing teams that are actual FBS teams, I think we might see their offense might not do quite as well as they did in that game. And they scored 70 in that game, man. And basically, when your offense has an outburst like that, the public likes to come in on you, think, oh my God, this team scored 70. We want to be on this team. This team is a scoring machine. Yeah, hold it a little bit, man. It was against a really bad team, really bad defense. And teams that they do that, they tend to not come out and do that again and replicate that quite again, even though this is a really bad Texas Tech defense. Like I said, I don't expect it to be totally replicated here. So Washington State, I think, can only be overvalued after we saw what happened there. The odds makers are telling you, lining this game at Washington State -1 at home, they're telling you Texas Tech is actually the better team. I mean, they're in the better conference. I mean, Washington State's in the Pac-12, what remains of the Pac-12, the ruins of the Pac-12. It's just them and Oregon State. Way to go, guys. That's it. Pac-12, oh boy. Texas Tech is at least, I believe, still in the Big 12, so they're at least in a better conference. So the odds makers are telling you Texas Tech's actually the better team, despite what your eyes see from that Week 1 matchup there. This is still a Washington State team without Cam Ward. Don't have him there anymore. And Texas Tech, their offense did well last week, but against Abilene Christian, an FCS team, they did not do well, only beating them by 1 and almost losing that game. That came down to a touchdown by Abilene Christian at the very end there. And Abilene Christian went for a 2-point conversion to try to win the game right at the end there. And that was in overtime, actually. Excuse me. So that game went into overtime. Abilene Christian scored a field goal to tie it in the final 5 seconds of regulation. And then they tried to go for the 2-point conversion in overtime to just win it in overtime, which a lot of times you see the lower schools try to do that against the bigger schools. So they figure we don't want to have a prolonged overtime here. Let's just try to win it here. So they were a 2-point conversion away from pulling off the upset against Texas Tech as 34.5-point underdogs. That's got to focus Texas Tech, dude, after that. Whereas Washington State might be feeling a little bit high after scoring 70. Texas Tech, even though they scored 52, they almost lost as massive favorites. 30-whatever point favorites at home to Abilene Christian. And Abilene Christian is, well, they are one of the little brothers in the state of Texas, but there are a lot of those. There are a lot of schools in Texas, so that's not really an excuse. Texas Tech just was horrific in that game, and I think they're going to refocus, man. They know they almost lost against a really, really inferior team. So I think that's going to refocus Texas Tech, whereas Washington State, coming off a 70-point outburst, might have a tendency to be a little bit less focused. And this does scare me a little bit. This is just real bad. Texas Tech allowed 615 yards to Abilene Christian. Ooh, that's bad. But Texas Tech's offense was definitely rolling. So at least we got that going for us. Oh, man. And Washington State's defense didn't particularly look good against Portland State either. So that is going to be the play. I think Texas Tech is in the refocus spot there. And Washington State's, a little bit of a letdown spot. But to put well, maybe not a letdown spot because it was Portland State. Who cares? But when you come off a 70-point outburst like that, you tend to be a little bit high on yourself. And then what does Washington State have up next? I mean, yeah, they're playing Texas Tech here. But Washington State, they already played their home opener. This is not a conference game because basically no game is going to be. They probably play their entire conference during the year because it's only Oregon State, which they do later. But look at who they have up next, man. Their big in-state rivalry game against Washington is up next week. So I think that's a look-ahead spot, man, to Washington. So I think Washington State's in a bad spot here. They might overlook that. They might see, Texas Tech did so badly and almost lost to Abilene Christian. Washington State might think they can win this game easily. And that may not be the case. So they may not bring total focus in there. So I like that. Texas Tech plus 1.5. And I think that's going to do it. There might have been one other game I was going to not focus on, but one other game I was going to touch on briefly before I got out of here, but I don't remember what it was. Oh, it was Clemson against App State. This one's a little bit interesting to me. Clemson still ranks 25th, but Clemson, man, as I mentioned last week, I leaned against them to the Georgia side, and Clemson got wrecked by Georgia. I mean, Clemson just didn't put up any points. Georgia is an elite defense, though. They're an elite team. But still, 3 points. Even though Georgia does play really well defensively recently in the first game, they tend to hold opponents to really low scores in that first game. But still, Clemson, I mean, that doesn't look good, scoring 3 points there. And I mentioned it last week when I said I leaned to Georgia. Clemson, Dabo Swinney just refuses to adapt to the new college football landscape, man. He does not go with the transfer portal. And all these other teams get a leg up on him because they're willing to go out and get some really good transfers and bring them in. When you're a team that's supposed to be in the upper echelon of college football, like Clemson was for so many years up until recently, you're in the ACC, you're supposed to be a contender, you have to be hitting that transfer portal, man, because all of your competition is hitting the transfer portal and getting those guys, and you're supposed to be competing against them for some of those transfers, and he's just not doing that, and it's to their detriment, as he's trying to just build the talent in-house, basically, and it's just not working, man. He's going to have to learn that. So I don't love the Clemson side in this game, even though it was kind of an embarrassing loss to Georgia. But it is also a game you get emotionally up for, a big opener in a big NFL stadium. That was in Atlanta against Georgia. You do still get up for that game. And when you get crushed like that, that can kind of crush your spirits a bit, man. And that might be the type of situation that Clemson is in here. And they're playing a much lesser App State team. And they do have a ranked NC State team up next, which is going to be the start of ACC play for them. So that could even be a look ahead, although they do have a bye actually in between. So that's 2 weeks ahead. But it could be a little bit of a sandwich there. I'm not going to play this one, but again, and App State has been one of the better lower tier FBS teams in one of the lower conferences. They've been one of the better mid majors in FBS, not FCS, FBS. App State's made some bowls, man. I mean, they were in a bowl again last year. I think they've had a good program for years now. So they're not really a team that I think these FBS guys are really going to overlook because they know that App State is actually pretty good. But I don't know, man. Clemson, I mean, they are in that spot where they are. They do have this sandwich between two pretty big games, and App State just had a much easier, emotionally at least, game against a much easier game in general, really, against East Tennessee up last week. So I kind of lean to the App State side just because I think Clemson really could have had potentially their spirits crushed by that last one. I think they know they're not going to be doing anything. They're down to the 25th ranked team. They're favored by 17 here. Looks like it's dropped a little bit against App State. 56% of the tickets on them, but 53% of the cash. So the market seems to be indicating on taking the points with App State. It is a nice, juicy amount of points there, especially when you see a Clemson team that only scored 3, although, again, it was against Georgia. Their offense is not going to continue to be that bad, but still, it's an interesting game at the very least. So a lot of things kind of going on in that one. I think that's finally going to do it for me, man. That's the week 2 college football video in the books, giving you about another hour there. My 4 plays this week, once again, are Army +3, South Carolina plus 9.5, or you could wait and maybe get 10, because I think at worst, you're still going to be able to get probably 9.5 on that one if it doesn't hit the 10. East Carolina plus 1.5 and Texas Tech plus 1.5 are the plays for me this week. Let's have a good one, man. Have a good week. It could not be as bad as it was last week, where it was 0. Well, it could be, I guess. It could be 0-4. That would be worse than 0-3, but that can't. Come on. I can't possibly jinx it, right? That can't happen. I mean, come on. I'm not going to jinx it. It's not going to happen. Come on. I'm starting to heat up again and have some decent plays the last couple of days on a nice little mini run trying to get back. I'm still, I think, 2,000 something away from breaking even on the year, though, with a few months left. We got to get this done, man. Football season's starting. Let's turn this around. I feel good about the NFL so far, so I'm going to put my NFL video out probably tomorrow at this point. Like, I don't think those lines are really going to change that much more. And I already told you what my plays are. I had the Eagles tonight -2, and I already told you I'm on the Tennessee Titans +4 and the New York Jets +4.5. I think those lines are mostly still out there. Like Tennessee, at worst, you can probably take +3.5, and then probably at worst +4 on the Jets. But I think those lines might still be there, especially the public getting involved on Sunday and Monday might cause those lines to still kind of stay right around where they are. So you can probably still get most of that value out of those. That's going to do it for me, man. I am Tower Gang Toad, of course, on Twitter. You can find me and all my sports ranting, sports betting talk, but also political shit posting and just generally ridiculous jokes and stuff at this point. And you can find me on the Tower Gang podcast, of course, every Wednesday nights, 9:11 p.m. Eastern. We are the most offensive comedy podcast on the planet, and we have a show on September 11th coming up this week, the 9/11. We usually do a 9/11 special of some kind, but it's going to be on the actual day of the week that we do the show anyway. So hopefully we'll get something a little bit extra and fun prepared for that one. So follow the Tower Game podcast. We're on the platforms. You can find us. We're still somehow on YouTube, at least for live streaming purposes. We live stream to Rumble. We're trying to get people over there. And we live stream to Odyssey as well. And we... I don't even know what else I was about to say. And I put the episodes up after the fact on Spotify and all the audio platforms. So you can find us there as well. And I always give a shout out to Flapper because they are good to me. I don't know if he still gives shout outs to me on his blog, but flappr.net. Flapper. They have a Twitter account as well, and they have a blog that is political shit posting and also has some sports content on it. Has a lot of history content on it if you're into that. Political history kind of, and they also talk about women a lot, so they align with me on all of our areas of interest basically there. So Flapper, give them a look as well, and they have some solid merch as well. But of course we do also have solid merch on Tower Gang provided by Top Lobster, one of my co-hosts on Tower Gang. Go check his stuff out, toplobster.com. Buy some Tower Gang merch there if you would like to, and sign up for the Tower Gang Patreon as well if you want to support us. We are on the Patreon now. You get to hang out with us in a Telegram. You get to talk more betting with me on there if I'm active. I've been becoming like decently active on there at the very least. I'm a busy man, all right? I got a job. I got stuff to still do, but you get access to the Telegram. We've been live streaming our pre-shows for Tower Gang where we're just kind of setting up and dicking around. But the most recent one was actually really hilarious, possibly funnier than the first like half hour of the actual show. And we also live stream a post-show after the regular show is over. We get a little bit friskier in the penthouse, and we usually have something prepared for that as well. So you get that bonus content if you sign up for the Patreon, which I think is patreon.com/TowerGang or Tower Gang Pod. I forget which, but you should be able to find it. The link to that is always in the Tower Gang descriptions as well. So do that. Throw us some support and get some extra content and come hang out with us. And that's going to do it. Once again, man, I'm Toad, Tower Gang Toad. Let's have a good week. Thanks, Scott, for being the only one commenting, being my one viewer, I suppose, for this. Peace out, everyone. It is late, baby. It's 1 a.m. Eastern. Have a good one. Have a good night. Peace.